Yep, here we go. People are starting to trickle in. Lovely. Hi, everybody. My name is Nancy Sanchez, and I am the Community Outreach Coordinator here at TPA. We're excited to have you for today's webinar. I will quickly go over through a slide deck and turn things over. So thank you to Wondery, our community building sponsor, helps us put our webinars on for you all. Our upcoming events, March 25th, Sound Like a Pro with Adobe, March 26th. We have The Sounds of True Crime, which is presented by CNN, highly recommend. And March 31st, the Ambie ceremony, which will be in Chicago. We hope to see you there. April 10th, Fair Use for US podcasters. And April 16th is our annual membership meeting. And more events on our website, so please take a look at those. All right, we all know about the Ambies, March 31st. We hope to see you in chilly Chicago. If you are not a member or know somebody that's not a member and would like to join, please use code TPA25 to receive 25% off your first year of membership. And make sure to follow us on social media. We're always looking to grow our community. And that's it. I will stop sharing and turn this over to Johnny and Chris. All right, enjoy your webinar.
Thanks, Nancy.
You.
And thanks everyone for joining us. I hope everyone's having a warm and lovely Tuesday, wherever you are in the world. For me, I'm enjoying the weather in Charlotte, North Carolina. My voice, on the other hand, is feeling like it's in the Antarctic. So I will try to warm it up throughout the presentation, but I sound a little bit more froggier than usual. That's why. But all that to say, thanks again for joining us, everyone. My name is Joni Deutsch. In addition to being a proud TPA member, as well as a blue ribbon judge, congrats to all of the Ambie nominees out there. I am Senior Vice President of Marketing and Audience Development at Podglomerate. So for those who may not know, the Podglomerate is an award-winning podcast services firm. We specialize in production, marketing, and monetization of outstanding audio content. We've been around since about 2017. Since then, the Podglomerate has grown to represent more than 70 podcasts, accounting for millions and millions and millions of monthly downloads. Our shows have topped the podcast charts on all the major apps. We've gotten coverage across print, digital, radio, television, beyond. And our high-profile list of clients have included anyone from Freakonomics Radio and NPR and PBS to the Boston Globe, Harvard, Stanford, CBS, HubSpot, Substack. The list goes on and on. So I'll conserve my voice in that regard and just say that when it specifically comes to our production capabilities and questions about production, which is why you all are here today, we offer tailored services and insights from end-to-end production needs, from pre-production to finalized product. And that's because of our amazing production team that is helmed by our own Vice President of Production Services, Chris Boniello. So I'll do a quick introduction for Chris, and then he'll take it away with the presentation. So Chris is our VP of Production Services, as I mentioned. He is an Emmy, Webby, and Signal Award-winning producer and video editor. He has 14 years of experience in this field. He has done it all. He has seen it all. He has won so many of those awards. He has previously worked on campaigns for high-profile clients like Nike, Mercedes-Benz, Comedy Central, Spotify, and beyond. He actually worked on NBC's Saturday Night Live, so if you want to ask him questions about that offline, feel free. He has some cool stories. But when it comes to podcasting, Chris has done it all as well. Sound editor, mixer, producer. Fairly recently, he was working on Spotify's The Best Advice podcast, History Channel's History This Week, and Sports History This Week. And then also Lifetime's I Love a Lifetime Movie. I know, classic. And with his work at the Podglomerate, he is overseeing video and audio production services for a wide variety of our shows. That includes current Ambie Award nominees, What Could Go Right in a Fine Mess, as well as Harvard Business School's Climate Rising. Chris has a lot to say. We have a lot to get into this hour. And of course, I encourage everyone here, if you have any questions about what we're talking about today, or any specific examples of things that you're encountering that maybe are hurdles, go ahead and put them in the Zoom chat. And at the end, we'll spend about 10-15 minutes going through all of your questions. So no questions too small or big here. With that, Chris, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Joni, for the wonderful intro. As Joni said, I'm Chris Boniello, the Vice President of Production Services here at the Podglomerate. Started in the video world and then moved over into podcasting, really dug in once the pandemic hit and production had shut down in New York City, where I was living at the time, and now has kind of seen podcasting come back towards video. So can use my experience in the video world and help brands and help people and podcasters and anyone from small scale to large scale figure out what they want to do in terms of adding video to their podcast arsenal. So now down to the basics, we have audio and video for podcasts in a lot of our productions. We're seeing more people switch over to video or interested in learning how they can add video and at what scale and at what budget. Both using just audio or video for your podcasting has a lot of unique opportunities. There's advantages and disadvantages. There's ways it can help enhance your storytelling or enhance your engagement with an audience. And there's ways it can also impact your budget, your timing, your workflow. So we're going to go into different ways you can mix and match those things. There's hybrid approaches. There isn't one size fits all. It really depends on what you're doing. It's similar to just podcasting in general. You could be making a chat show. You could be making a narrative show. You could be investigating something for years and years, or it could be 15 minutes about today's news. So you can also use that same flexibility in what you're doing for video. And then if you're finding that video is tough or you need to adjust what you're doing, you don't need to have a video podcast. Don't feel like just because video is happening a lot and people are asking about it, you need to force whatever you're working on to fit into a video landscape. There's ways to dip your toes in and adjust what you're doing on the fly, as well as down the line on different seasons or on a chat show. So your decision kind of depends on what you have in terms of time, your workflow, and your budget and equipment. And we're seeing video podcasting becoming a lot more popular, and a lot of clients that we're interacting with are asking about it. A lot of our shows currently have video, and you're probably hearing in a lot of things you news as well, or in your news as well as newsletters, that it's a growing area to play with. Spotify has now added video. You can upload your podcast to Megaphone hosting on video. YouTube is such a large search engine globally that is a great place to have your content, and it's a way to expand your reach from beyond just what people are finding in their podcast apps or podcast players. A lot of people are using YouTube on their televisions now as well. I know I'm a YouTube premium subscriber, and people are using YouTube Music to listen to podcasts. And so you using video and having your show recorded visually gives you an opportunity to share your content across a lot of different channels. It can help with discovery, it can help with growth, and it also helps with the personal engagement. You know, we live in a time right now where people are questioning if certain videos or products are being made with AI or if they're real or not. And this is a way you can have your host looking directly into a camera and engaging directly with your audience members. And so there's some strengths we're going to look at and some weaknesses for both audio and video. We've split them up, audio on the left, video on the right here. So jumping into what I call the storytelling strengths. With audio, you have the theater of the mind. You are directly in your listener's head. You can have things move stereo left to right. It can feel like something is existing in its own world. They can close their eyes and imagine what they're describing. I know I love listening to Welcome to Night Vale and getting lost in that type of world and that type of soundscape, which would be much harder to do on the video side of things. And then for conversational shows or just chat shows or even interview shows, you've got much more intimacy in that conversation. It feels like you're sitting there, a part of that conversation, versus just viewing it as a third party observer or watching it on your TV. It's kind of there to go with you wherever you're taking it. If you're walking your dog, you're driving around in the car, you're just sitting in your house, it gives you an opportunity to feel like you're personally sitting there and part of that conversation. And then one of the big strengths is the flexibility that audio has on its own. It can work really well for interviews. It can work well for narratives. You can have a scripted story. It can be short. It can be long. You're not really tethered to needing to create something visually that someone has to directly engage with for all that time. It allows you a way to test and experiment without getting too locked into a singular workflow. And then on the video side of things, for your storytelling strength, like I mentioned earlier, you have a visual connection now between your host or your whatever you're creating and your audience. You have people looking directly into their eyes. You have facial expressions. When a host tells a joke to a guest, you can see them laugh, you can see them cringe. It makes things more exciting, as well as you're combining these visuals with graphics. So now you can have even deeper levels of storytelling. If it's a narrative show, you can create something that someone is viewing. If there's a fire happening in a house, and instead of it just being within your ears, they can see artifacts being burned, they can feel that a bit stronger. As well as for when you're at the level of working with brands or advertisers, you have a lot more opportunities to put in branded content and recognition within what you're building, whether it's just simply a studio that has branded elements around it or within the storytelling elements. Say you're telling a story about the history of flaming hot Cheetos. Now you can show bags of them and show the branding that helps it get a little bit deeper versus than what people are just imagining in their head on audio only. But then there's also limitations on both sides. So for the audio side, what we had just come from, that were some of the strengths of the video, are some of the negatives on the audio side. You don't have any visual cues. You can't tell if someone asked an uncomfortable question as an interviewer to a guest. If the guest is nervous or confused, you have to try to listen to it. It can be a lot harder to convey those complex emotions visually. You also are fighting for or fighting against whatever people are currently doing in their lives. If they're just listening to a podcast, maybe they are walking their dog and their dog is trying to chase a squirrel, or they're driving the car and there's a bunch of GPS directions happening. And so you're now fighting against that. You have to either make sure you can keep the audience's engagement or build ways for them to take a breath and come back and refocus, which can be a tool you can use in audio a lot easier than video. If you're limiting your video, then people kind of check out. But if you're giving them a breath on the audio side, it can allow them to refocus back in. And then you have your limited emotional range that goes back to the visual cues as well. You're only using voice and sound design here. So you need to build, and you're building a lot on the sound design side of things. If you're trying to tell a narrative versus on the strengths on the video, you can have a strong on-screen presence and your host can then, help engage directly. But that can also be a limitation. If your host, isn't captivating, isn't charismatic, isn't able to have confidence and engage with, say, an interview show, if they're engaging with the guest, if they're aloof or looking away, or they seem nervous, that can weaken your product. And on the storytelling side of the editing, not just simply the production side of it, it's a lot harder to fix the items on your video side. So you're trying to tell a bigger story, a bigger narrative. You have a documentary, you have talking heads, you have people moving around. It can be a lot easier to jump between things on the audio side, where on the video side, now you're creating jump cuts in not only the video, but in the storytelling side of elements. That can be tough to go straight from someone talking head interview into an outdoor scene suddenly on video, where in audio you can bring people in much easier with some simple either narration or sound design. And then if your video content isn't immediately engaging, which we're seeing a lot and we're testing out on YouTube, even on our own productions, that audiences can be a bit more passive. They may come and start a show, they may click away, they may move around. There's so many things fighting for their attention, especially on a platform like YouTube, that you need to make sure it's exciting. And if it's not, you're going to end up with more passive viewers on the video side. But then on the production side, there are advantages and disadvantages as well. And this is talking about, the physical production, including your equipment, and the items needed to make the show, not necessarily just telling the story or producing it. On the audio side, you've got lower costs, and it can be really simple as that when you're looking to make some of these decisions. With audio, a lot of microphones now have become very, very affordable that are very good. And to edit audio, it's a much simpler editing software. There's a lot of free options that are really great. There's a lot of lower tier options that aren't nearly as expensive, or single options, like if you're just getting Adobe Audition, for example, versus getting the entire Creative Cloud suite, you're going to be paying a lot more for something like that versus the single piece of software. And it's a lot easier to edit simply on audio. You can clean up jumps, you can fix people's sentences. A term we like to use is called a frankenbite, where you're cutting multiple parts of a sentence together. And it can be easier to hide those things, especially if it's a talking head interview. On the audio side, you can help someone get their message across a little bit easier, versus on the video side, you're going to need to decorate or cover up what they're seeing, or you're going to have jump cuts and the person may jump around and their eyes may jump, and it might be distracting and confusing to watch. As well as there's simply less equipment needed and less space. A lot of podcasters start out in a bedroom, a bathroom, a closet, a place where they can put in a bunch of pillows and blankets and have a good sound recording environment. Or it could be simply an environment like this, sitting at a desk with a microphone, headphones. I've got one simple preamp. I could record an interview chat show pretty simply here, or talk to someone over a software like Riverside, versus needing to go too far into setting up equipment beyond a webcam, microphone, headphones, which makes it nice. On the video side of things, you've got a lot more discoverability with this content. You're now making an element for a singular show that can be repurposed as video. It can also be taken as audio separately. So you're kind of getting a 2-for-1 deal, depending on how much effort you're putting in on the front end. You've now got something already cut for video that's already almost at the same level being cut for audio. There's usually additional cleanup needed, but it gets you 90% of the way. And it allows for a lot better monetization options. You've got a lot of options for video sponsorship now, video ads that you're putting on YouTube. So now your audience is more directly engaged with you, and they're viewing those things directly to a brand, to a client for a sponsorship. And then when you're setting up, the production element side of video, you can kind of show off some of your strengths a bit better. On audio, there's a bit of a lower ceiling. You can have really great mixers, and you can have really great sound designers and sound editors that really elevate things. But on video is where you can now add sliders, and you can add zooms and glide cams and different lights and different sorts of effects that really make it stand out against, a sea of other people's content. And then the challenges come with that as well on the production side. For audio, the quality of what you're recording really, really matters. Something I like to say to potential clients or even current shows, what we're working on, is one of the big challenges with audio is everything that you're doing is destructive. You can't really make anything better than what it was recorded. You're adjusting frequencies and you're isolating things and boosting things. And there's a lot of tools to work on that, but nothing beats having a good, clean recording initially. So that can be challenging, whether it's background noise, sirens, anything that can just happen during a recording. We've had many strange instances of animals, chickens, goats, cows, things that happen on all different types of shows. We've recorded a couple shows remote on various locations in jungles or islands, and you're either fighting to remove something, or you need to be aware that you're going to be letting your audience know what they're in store for on the audio side of things if there are noises or items that you couldn't quite remove and clean up. And now you're limited to just telling either your story or that interview with voice and simply sound design. And there can be instances on that are a big challenge, especially with sound design where there's no visual element to connect what someone's listening to directly to their eyes. We had a one time on, I believe it was a Pete Rose episode of Sports History This Week, where we were going around and arguing for a few days on what the baseball bat and pitch sounds should sound like, what it really should sound like when you throw the baseball, hit the baseball, catch it in the glove. And there can be a disconnect there when you're working on the back end, like we were on the sound design side, where the file is called, baseball bat hits ball. And to you, you've already made that connection. And then you send it off and someone's listening to it without seeing the sound effect file or knowing directly what happened. And they're not quite connecting with that environment. And that can be frustrating on a creative side to set up, hey, we need this to hit this sort of moment in the listener's head, but the sound needs to be right. So we need to try to figure out what is a sound that everyone knows, what is representative of this, and what things can we cheat and, adjust. Something that's always interesting to play with as a little side tidbit is I think the bus sounds in New York City for some reason sound kind of like the T-Rex from Jurassic Park. So there's fun things you can play with there, but it adds a new challenge to it, especially when you're creating something that doesn't exist as a sound in the real world. And then on the marketing side of things, it can be a bit tougher. You're not getting small elements for the video to put on social media or longer clips to put on places like LinkedIn. So now you're limited to trying to create something with just audio as a source to share that as a marketing product and to help grow your show. And then you're not able to, other than if you've got great headshots or other sort of graphic elements and graphic design work that you're doing, present your hosts or your interviewers or your guest or even the world of your story if you're building a narrative to the audience beyond either still images or trying to create something, out of scratch. And then on the video side, one of your biggest production challenges is probably going to be budget. It's going to be a much higher budget to do video work. Even at a basic level, it's going to take a lot more time. There's a lot larger files. And then now you're setting up a camera. And if you really want to make sure, people are engaging with your host, you're setting up lighting, you're doing color correction, you're making sure the clothes that people are wearing are the right clothes, making sure it doesn't look strange now on this camera and have weird strobing effects. You want the backgrounds on an interview show to look great. And now not only are you dealing with your host setup, but you're also dealing with the setup of the guest. So if the guest comes on and they have a really messy background or they've got food or even copyrighted posters or images or things that you don't want to have on your podcast or associated with your show, or you're afraid legally you don't want to use that. Now you're going into either cleaning it up or asking that guest to change their setup, and that can be awkward, that can upset people, or it can add to more work on the back end for you. And that leads into how video can be a lot more time consuming on the editing side, especially if you're using multiple cameras, multiple camera angles. You're now processing all of that footage, all of that audio. If you are at the level that you're doing color correction and you're making sure skin tones and lighting matches, now you're matching multiple cameras back and forth. There's always issues with matching cameras and lighting. It can really go down a rabbit hole, and you're going to have a lot bigger demands in terms of your storage. Your files are going to be a lot larger. The ways you send them and the ways you share them are going to be a lot tougher, as well as just keeping your projects and your files safe, either on backup drives or a server system or a master online cloud system. You've got to add in that budget for that time for that larger tech demands. When you upload, a simple audio only podcast for an hour long can be 200 megabytes or so. It's not very big. And you've got an hour long now video podcast. And especially if you're going beyond 1080p and going up to 4K footage, you can have something anywhere from 10 to 30 gigabytes for a single file. And so the complexity really ramps up. And then at any point, you have a failure or an upload has an issue and you're not sure what's going on, you're kind of starting that process over again, which can be a big challenge in terms of hitting deadlines and making sure that, a client is happy and a show is published on the day it's supposed to be published. And so when you're looking at setting up video into your podcast workflow, you have a few options of where you're going to go with your budget. And you can use scaling on your budget to start on the lower end and progressively work towards enhancing that quality and enhancing your reach and making sure that the viewing experience can evolve over time and is exciting for your viewer. It's one simple way to build out a production as you're going. You don't always need to go full in and make sure you buy 8 cameras and a bunch of lights and have a crazy setup to start. You can add new elements, and that can also be a trick on the marketing side to keep things more interesting. Now we have this new camera angle. You can throw a joke into it. You can have a producer camera angle on an interview show, and we're going to throw it to producer so and so who well, we don't have enough for this camera yet, but joke about it, have something on screen, have some text, have a motion graphic, and then over time you can ramp that up. And so it can really then add on the back end what you're putting out for your audience on the social side of elements. And there's ways to play with it. If you want to keep it really serious, you can do teasers now like films do. You can do a trailer, you can do something exciting to release and tease what you're doing. But you want to make sure you don't go too far too fast. And depending on if you're a solo creator, a small team, a small company, this is a lot more complicated software and tools to learn. So might want to get one camera, really learn how that camera works, get a second one of that same camera, and now you've kind of start to master that skill and you know what goes wrong. It's always a tough world to see if, all the posts on Reddit or different camera forums, what's going on with new software when things update and you're trying to keep your system at one level that's working for you and then debating on upgrading. So you can take somewhat of a hybrid approach going into this. You don't always need to go fully into multicam right away. You can use short snippets for social as you're figuring out the workflow for a full interview or for a narrative show, and then begin doing full episodes. So looking at a few different budget options here, and what would be on the left side are equipment options, and on the right side, how you'd go about that process, on scaling this from a low all the way up to a high budget. There's a huge range. You can initially set stuff up for a couple $100s into a couple $1,000s, and then this can balloon into hundreds of thousands depending on how complicated things need to go. So on a lower budget, you probably already have a lot of really good pieces to set up this level of a production. A lot of smartphones now have really amazing cameras. They're quite impressive, especially with low light, and you can simply add a tripod, a mobile tripod to them. There's a lot of the base level recording apps too, where if you're not going too far into recording on your own sort of separate software, there's something like you could use Riverside or Squadcast, and a lot of these, even on Zoom, a lot of them are going to let you use your phone as a camera. And then you can also use your webcam like I'm talking to on here, and webcams have gotten really great. Even the built-in ones on monitors now do their own blurs. They do some backgrounds. And then this allows you to be a bit more flexible too. You could use your smartphone as a secondary angle, and now you've got two angles pretty quickly. And if you're just simply recording on the video record on your phone, a lot of them are built to record for longer periods without causing any issues. So it's a nice way to have everything all in one place with a simple few touches. And for lighting, if you're going to keep your budget, affordable and lower end, you can make sure you set up wherever you're recording in some good natural light. Be by some windows, have the light shining on you. One of the keys here at any of the budget levels is making sure you're getting good eye light. You want to have a little sparkle in your host and your guest's eyes. That can be something you can suggest to a guest when they come on for a talk show. If there's a way that they can set up, you can have them send you some photos ahead of time of where they're going to be sitting. And that can be a way to enhance the quality of what you're making without needing to put too much budget into equipment going to a guest. Sometimes just spending a little bit of time on the front end really saves you a lot of time on the back end there. And then on your audio side, there are a lot of affordable, cheaper microphones depending on what you're looking for. If you're just doing a talk show, there's a lot of good microphones in the beneath $100, even lower than $60 range. If you're moving around and talking to people in different environments, there's a lot of affordable lavalier microphones, which are the kind of clip-on microphones you'll see on people's shirts. They've become incredibly popular with YouTube creators. You'll see people going around with the magnetic ones clipped to their shirt. And an audience is going to be pretty forgiving of seeing equipment at this level. There isn't the need, like, for example, on an interview like 60 Minutes, where they've got boom microphones set up and hidden lavaliers in the host and the guest's clothing and a big whole pack to connect everything together. At this level, people are going to be okay seeing your microphone. They're going to be happy that you're investing in some equipment versus just recording on voice memo. And then on that side of things, voice memo for a talk show isn't a bad option either, because how good cameras have gotten on cell phones, the microphones are really, really great. That's kind of the most important piece on a phone, or maybe it used to be, but they're still really, really great microphones. And as long as you're setting it up properly, you have the option to get pretty clear audio that you can use pretty easily to send to yourself via email or AirDrop. And that's a good way to get in at a lower budget. And you've got the option to, on the right-hand side, you can see kind of your process, and it lets you be flexible. You have the ability, if you're filming on a phone with a tripod and a small lavalier microphone, you can move around. You're not trapped in a studio with a full microphone setup or a big camera setup. So that can be a way to engage your audience and have them be interested in what's happening around you. Why do you decide to record this episode in this location? And you can use the free world around you, whether it be parks, museums, more exciting things, to help increase the view of your production level without really increasing your budget. And now, when you get into the audio side of things, there are a lot of free tier softwares or software that can be $20 to $50 a month that can help you edit, as well as a lot of programs coming now that do pretty impressive initial edits for you that are going to help you learn what to edit, what you're looking to remove, help try to isolate out filler words and other, kind of hiccups and background noises. There's software like Descript that is pretty great for an all-in-one at a lower budget level if you're looking at something to help you do audio, video, and have a paper edit and get a pretty good transcript without paying the price that's needed to get a human to sit down and really listen and type it out. You're not going to get it converted to a ton of different languages or anything like that, but it gives you a great starting spot, and it lets you start to see some of the continued either issues or things you want to work on your podcast. Say you want your host to adjust the way they're doing their intros. Now you have them on paper. You can play around with the cadence, and you can play around with the order and copy and paste sentences. And then at this level, you haven't gone to the point of multiple cameras, multiple audio sources. So it's pretty quick on the back end to export your final video and then be able to upload it to any one of the free hosting services. And YouTube has a bunch of tools and is a pretty easy upload process. And then as you scale up, you can scale up your complexity on the back end of YouTube. And it's a great place just to learn the workflow and the timing at this budget and this scale, to see how long it's going to take before your export finishes and before your upload finishes. And that's always something to keep in mind. Sometimes it feels like a lot of things are immediate in our current world, but with some of the size of these files, it's always good to have buffer time. And then moving up the scale from a low budget to a medium budget, which can be intro level for someone who has skills already in a lot of this equipment, coming from a production background, or this type of equipment would take a little bit of time. You know, you're gonna have to sit, read through some guidebooks, watch a lot of tutorials, but at this level is where you can start to play with different effects and different lighting packages and different ways that you're going to set up your host to engage directly with your audience. Or if you're telling more journalistic story, now you're at the tier where you can start to make it feel more like something you'd see on a YouTube creator's channel or even on television or in documentary. So with the camera, I would suggest starting out with a mid-range DSLR or like a mirrorless camera. There's a couple listed here. I started playing around initially years and years ago with like a Panasonic GH2. Pretty affordable to buy a used one off eBay. There's a lot of people who are gearheads who churn through cameras all the time. And then there's a lot of places to go test them out or look at used options. For myself in New York, we go to B&H often in the city and pick up cameras and lenses. And at this level, you know, you're not looking for a cinema lens or one of those really impressive zoom lenses that you'd see on the sidelines at like a NFL or MLB game. You know, you've got the scale here to move up or down in terms of pricing and what you're trying to design and what your final desire is for the look. So you can set up a tripod where you need and have a lens that works for your face and your environment. And this will help teach you some of those more subtle elements of setting up a camera beyond simply what a webcam or your phone will do. Now, the fancier phones, like the pro level iPhones, do have multiple lenses, so you can at least see how different a face looks on a wide angle versus, you know, a telephoto lens. And that can be something that adds a little bit more complexity at this level, this medium budget. And then you've got the option to upgrade to higher quality microphones. In this range, it can really scale from 150 to $400 or $500 pretty easily. The Shure MV7 is pretty much an industry standard. You'll see them all over the place. It is simple to use, but has a lot of features. I'm using a Rode Pod mic, which I like a lot in terms of the way it works with my preamp and how much power it takes. And this is kind of a mid-tier microphone. You wouldn't really see one of these in a large professional studio setup, but it works great for at-home content. And then when you scale to this medium budget, you're going to have more lighting options. You can think about using LED panels or even multiple versions of those ring lights that you may see on TikTok videos. And you can put them directly on your camera as well as on your desk, play around with them. And this is where you can make the biggest step from a look of a solo creator just at home testing it out to much more professional. You can have your framing set up, you can do what's called 3-point lighting, and you can make sure that someone's face is really shining and engaging. And that just helps elevate things way beyond it feeling sometimes like a Zoom call if the elements are lower budget and you haven't really worked on a background or set things up with your guest. People will wonder, well, why do I need to watch this? And this is where you can start to really answer that question through some creative design and creative elements. And then once you get into your editing, you can use software like Avid or Adobe Premiere. And there's different tiers of a lot of different nonlinear editing software now. And so the price can really scale depending on what you need. But this is where you can do some more sophisticated effects. You can do borders, motion graphics, and this can really help decorate your image and decorate your frame, and then also enhance what you recorded on these higher level cameras and equipment. And then publishing is still pretty much the same, but now you have a lot more elements to put out on social media or to play with, and it helps you with your marketing when you have something at this scale, because it's really going to step you above the baseline of people who are using just a webcam and kind of locked into that lower budget. And then if you really, really want to go up to the top tier at a big budget, there's a lot of high-end cameras. There's a lot of options. The Sony FX3, the Canon R5s, there's the Sony FS7s. There's a lot of, now you're at the scale of independent filmmakers and even now a lot of cinema professionals. And now you've got microphones like the SM7B, and you're going to have an interface, and it's going to add a lot more complexity. You're going to have equipment that needs power and is going to add noise to what you're recording. And now you're going to have a lot more cables, a lot more failure points. And then on the lighting side, this is where you could go really crazy and set up lighting panels and full lighting rigs like something you'd see in a theater or in a professional studio. And this is kind of where, whatever you can dream could happen here depending on your budget. You could fully soundproof a room. You can have advanced lighting panels and controls. You can have audio panels and controls to set up different sound effects. This is something like you'd see in a big satellite radio studio setup where you're seeing multiple camera angles, multiple microphones. This can go way, way beyond to even a full studio system setup. And now you're adding a lot more complexity on the recording with multiple cameras and lighting. Your team is really going to expand at this level. And then at the editing level, not only is the software you're using a bit more complex, but you're doing a lot more within that process. You're going to be doing color grading and special effects. And, at that point, you can put this out to broadcast if you really wanted to. And then here are some just simple examples of kind of how these budgets play out. On the upper left here, we have an example from Pod Save America, which would be at the lower level of the budget. So you're using a webcam, they're using AirPods, and they're just talking on a basic microphone. I think that's the Audio Technica 1200. And those are great. That's all stuff you can easily get on Amazon and set up. And with this one, it is enhanced by at least them having a nicer background setup versus just it being in a random room. They've got at least a bookshelf and some items to look at that set a nice staging. And then to the right, you have an example from Creator Science, which I took this screenshot to show that at this level too, you can start adding graphics as well. So there's graphics at the bottom. This camera has a nice depth of field on its lens, so you've got that nice blur going in the background. It helps you engage more directly with the guest, and they've got a professional microphone set up on a boom arm with headphones to reduce any echo. And then down at the bottom, we've got ESPN Fantasy Focus, which is way, way up at that tier. You're going to have multiple lighting rigs at the top. You've got all of these microphones set up on professional boom arms. They're all networked. They've got multiple camera angles going here. And so that's where that high level budget could really scale from a really nice in-home studio all the way to something like ESPN is doing. And then I really wanted to just show that or say that there's also kind of a wild card option too. You're looking at these examples. There's always animation as a fun wild card, which can be something as simple as animating the words that people are saying, animating your cover art, or doing a full animation of a show. I think the Ricky Gervais show that was on HBO for a while is a fun example of you're taking a conversation and then animating it, and that gives you a lot more freedom, but that can also really impact your budget, especially if you're doing high level animation. And so this comes into why video could be the secret weapon that you're using for your podcast. You've got this enhanced discoverability and you've got the SEO power. YouTube is a huge, huge search engine. It's something people are using every day, almost as much as Google. They're, they've hit, I think more than, it was recently, they hit more than 1 billion monthly active viewers of content. So you've got a lot of eyes on your project and what you're putting out. And now you've got multi-platform reach beyond just simply we're putting out our audio and people need to listen to it on podcast apps. Now you've got video for social elements, for LinkedIn, for wherever you're trying to upload a short clip, as well as just simply in emails now, something exciting to watch, what you're working on with your team. You have a lot more monetization opportunities. You have ways to engage directly with brands to say, we're going to put your product on screen every single one of our episodes. They're going to see the microphone brand. They're going to see the software we're using. We're not just going to have to tell the audience each episode in the audio, which may annoy them or people will fast forward through things. It's going to be there, whether on the nose or subtle, people will be seeing it. And then for the storytelling and for interview elements, you're going to get a lot more engagement and trust from your audience because they're going to be sitting there looking directly at your content or possibly looking directly in the eyes of your host. And they're going to get to see the way your host directly interacts with guests and how much fun they have versus, listening and being a little half involved, half walking a dog, half doing other items. So people will tend to sit down. I know myself with a YouTube premium subscription now, not having ads on it, I do tend to put it on the television and you could sit there and watch it more often than just listening to something. So you've got a few reasons here that video could really help expand your powers and be a secret weapon and something that you do to increase your reach and increase your engagement, as well as how you're going to approach monetization with brands and advertising and make your content more exciting. So really the bottom line here, like I had said, it's not really just a trend. We're really seeing it work across a lot of our shows, a lot of different shows. People are actively engaging with video content a lot more than they used to. And YouTube is a huge, huge platform for discovery. So it's definitely something to test out. And now you've got multiple levels of budget and complexity for workflow to try to see, do you want to test the waters? Do you really want to get into this? Or do you want to try out a few things, see your engagement? There's nothing that needs to be locked in. And that's one of the really fun things about podcasting, especially adding in video podcasting. This isn't going to broadcast on TV and needing to follow a lot of rules. You have the freedom to play around and you should. And as long as you're telling your audience and having fun with that, they'll have fun too. And then here is a slide to find out more. And I saw that Joni put a few things into the chat, so thank you for that. And then we wanted to open this up for any questions, and we can help answer things from equipment to workflow to general ideas. But thank you so much for attending. And if you'd like to learn more, go to podglomerate.com/media. We have a lot of blog articles there, and we're continually posting content. And if you look at our shows on YouTube, you'll see like we're testing things out too. We're seeing how this is really exciting. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And just as Chris was just saying, we are also not just a source of information, we are a source of service line production. So if you are needing assistance with pre-production, post-production, video production, or marketing and or monetization services to help grow and amplify your goals with your podcast, feel free to reach out to us. You can do so on our website, or you can send us an email at listen@thepodglomerate.com. And as Chris mentioned, I also put links in the chat for those who want to connect with us on LinkedIn and our blog. So Chris, it looks like we are getting some questions coming in. So I'm going to start first with Eric. His question was, how do you feel about video podcast distribution into Spotify? Can you tell us a little bit more about like what that entails, Chris, and your general thoughts around it?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how much they're testing out on Spotify. For us, we do multiple shows distributed by video to Spotify. So we upload through Megaphone, which is owned by Spotify, and it definitely adds some complexity and some time elements to it, uploading a much larger file to the back end on Megaphone versus just an audio file. But I do think it is exciting to engage with it on your phone. I've still been playing around with it like on my TV and a few other places where I think the UI needs to expand a little bit more into how you're going to interact with it. But it is nice to see into those studios. And as someone on the inside of the production world, I do like to see what people have set up and how they're recording and filming on the kind of behind the scenes element of it. I haven't dove too deep into anything narrative video on Spotify yet. I feel like there's a couple missing pieces there that they're working out, and we don't work directly with them on any of those, on any of that side of the item, so I don't know if anything's coming down the line, but I'd like to see a few more options similar to like what YouTube does when you have YouTube Premium, of letting you move the video around and have it be playing while you're opening other items. But I would hope that that's coming.
One thing I'll say about Spotify, for those that would like more information, even directly from Spotify about this video topic, we are actually planning a really great webinar with a Spotify representative. That webinar will be taking place in early May. If you want to attend that webinar for free, I'd encourage everyone here to sign up for our email newsletter. I'll share a link in the chat, but it should be a really great conversation with insights directly from Spotify's representative. So stay tuned. I'll put a link in the chat momentarily. While I do that though, Chris, a question coming in, cost for a video show in the New York area. I assume this is just a question of projected cost. If you were to do a video podcast and you're based in New York City or New York area for an in-person recording, do you have like an estimation of how much that would be?
Yeah, there's a lot of different studios you can go to. They have a lot of different rental fees. It really depends on what you're looking for and how much time you're looking to spend in a studio. Some can be $50 an hour up to $300 an hour. And you're going to be, depending on what you're renting for the time and the camera and the complexity, scaling between there. I would say $50 an hour is a good place to start as an estimate, and then can go up from there depending on how many cameras, videos, and if you need a person there at the studio engineering versus yourself, there's definitely ways to save money, or there's ways to go to different recording studios or like practice spaces that are more soundproof, where you can set up your own equipment and you can have a cheaper rental for a space and then use that equipment in that space to record yourself if you have those skills. But yeah, you're looking in the range of 50 to a couple $100 an hour, depending on what you're looking to do. And if you need an engineer and if you need multiple cameras and lights. But in a place like New York City, it's pretty affordable because there is a lot of options.
Yeah. We have another question from Lena about it sounds like they're exploring ideas for a kids or children's podcast, and it's a storytelling one, and they can't decide if it's best to focus on audio or they should put some kind of video into it. So what are your thoughts around that, Chris?
That's an interesting one. As someone who doesn't have kids, but I play a lot of content from my nephew, I've been playing around with this myself to see what he engages with and what's really exciting. I think on both ends of the scales, you're looking for like simple impact, where the video elements can be fun animation or fun teaching tools, and the audio is providing the more engaging item that they, as a child, are going to be processing a bit more. I think I really don't think you can go wrong with either option, but I think the idea to keep it simple and see what actually engages a kid is interesting. I think it's tough to know as an adult what's going to work until you've kind of tested out on a kid and see how that they're going to react to it. I think if they're in a car and they're just simply listening, and they're a kid who is engaged to listening to items, a car audio wise can be fun because then they're still viewing the world and engaging in just, the exciting exploration of everything being brand new. But I would think at home, like if I was watching my nephew, I might put on a video podcast on the TV because it does tend to help contain them in one room and engage directly with the item on the TV versus if I just put a podcast on the speakers throughout the house and then they could sprint around and scream and kind of lose the plot.
And maybe another idea here too, Lena, is to Chris's point, beta testing it. So maybe try a very easy, quick graphic or video that you can make via Canva or a free resource tool. Play it in front of maybe your target audience or families or parents and kids. See what they have to say about it. If they like it, great. Lean into that. Do more of it as part of your natural workflow. If they don't like it or if they had feedback, incorporate that into what you do next. So folks, I think we have time for one more question. So with one question about conversion for language purposes, what is the best way to get an English series, let's say video, converted into another language like Spanish? Chris, have you done much in terms of translations into other languages?
I have, but mostly at a high level at the broadcast kind of budgets where the best way at that level is actually getting a person to sit down and listen who is a native speaker who can help do the subtitles and the translation, and you're looking at dubbing and hiring actors. There's a lot of middle level companies who I really haven't tested too much with because I am not a native speaker of any other language, but I know people have had success with some of the different websites that provide services where it is a person still translating, but you're not looking to get voice actors to dub over. Say if you were doing a narrative show and you really need the full emotion of it. If it's just a chat show or an interview show, you're having the people either add subtitles to it or building a transcription to you that can be read or can be put out as its own separate content. I would test out the software ones, but I would assume that you're going to have a tougher time translating to software, but it can also really depend on the content of what you're making. And if the terms are colloquial terms that don't quite translate naturally to another language, that can be tough. I think you could easily find people who do translation who can help let you know how complex it's going to be before you decide to dive all the way in and translate a whole show. But on the narrative side, you could deal with voice actors having to dub, and that can be quite expensive. Or you can have just a person who's natural speaking of that language do the transcript and translation and decide from there, versus doing some of the software where you're going to kind of get probably some frustrating results, especially to another language. They're pretty great in a single language, but yeah.
For reference, what was the language software that you're referring to?
I mean, for basic stuff, let's see. I'm not sure if Rev does translations. That's who we've used for different speech texts, but I could put together a few lists.
Yeah.
It's always tough.
Well,
Whenever I did it, it was at like NBC and we had a team who actually truly did it.
yeah.
And they were, Spanish speakers. And so, if we said something that was strange in English, like, hey, I want to book a massage, but when you translate it, it's like, wait, it's not a book. That's where a headache can occur. And so it really depends on what the content is.
Yeah. Well, I'd say too, for everyone here, there's probably more questions than we have time to fit in this hour. So again, really appreciate everyone being here for this conversation. And Chris, thank you for leading it. For everyone who wants to stay connected with us, please be sure to go to our website. It is podglomerate.com. You can connect us on all sorts of ways there. Our email newsletter. If you want to reach out to us via email, it's listen@podglomerate, or you can find us on social media like LinkedIn. But all that to say, thank you all so much for your time, and also for the Podcast Academy for hosting us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Podglomerate. It was a great webinar, and we look forward to seeing everybody at an upcoming event. Bye, everybody.
Wonderful.
Bye,
Cheers.
everyone.